Taylor, Aubrey and I are so excited to be able to have you joining us with this
thrill.
conversation. Oh my goodness. This will be fun, the three of us being able to talk about this.
Yeah, I am so excited and terrified at the same time.
Well, I'll be honest with you, we've known each other for years.
Yeah.
Right. And over the course of us knowing each other, there have been little, bits and pieces of your story, but I don't think we've ever sat down and just walked through the whole thing together.
Yeah.
You and I. And so, which I feel a little bit disadvantaged. As our producer, normally that's the case when we're interviewing people. I intentionally don't want to hear someone's story beforehand. In this case, I'm going like, oh no, I kind of wish that I had, but at the same time, I think this is going to be a really sacred moment.
I think so too.
Because, one of the reasons that God called you to come and work alongside of us in this is because of your own pain story.
Yeah.
And your journey. And so, I just want to highlight that now as we're sitting down to have this conversation, as you're going to bless our listeners and encourage our listeners and fill them with hope, this is really kind of, the impetus behind why you are so, your heart is so tied to Nothing is Wasted Ministries, because you've seen that play out in your own life.
100%. And that's really, I'll definitely get into that as a part of my story, but I am here today and a part of this podcast because of the story that I'm going to share. And because in some of my pain, which I can talk about in my story, I went to Resonate Church and stayed there because of your pain and because you were talking about pain from the stage in some of my darkest seasons. And so the way that God has been so gracious and kind to get me from that place to this place and to use my pain for purpose in the middle of my pain. I was still working through my pain when he was using it for a purpose, has been incredible. And I am honored and privileged that I am even able to talk on this podcast and that all of the amazing people that have come on this podcast before me that we get to listen to all the time, that their courage goes before me, because I've gotten the privilege to sit in on hundreds of interviews now.
Wow.
And really have seen how God can use this podcast for good and for the healing of so many. And so I pray that the little bit of time that I have today with you and Aubrey, that that could be something for our listeners as well.
Well, I know it's going to be special.
Yeah,
I'd love first for our listeners, they're familiar with you, I know that, but
From the Singleness series.
that's true. From the Singleness series.
You are our guest co-host for
My
that
debut
series.
was the Singleness
right.
series of all things.
Right. But, we've really not had a chance to really kind of formally introduce you other than on social media and stuff like that, but never really on the podcast and kind of tell all the things that you're involved in and what you do, not just with us, but just in life. So why don't you introduce yourself as we do with all of our listeners? Tell us, who you are. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now in life. And then we'll go back and start talking about your story.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm Taylor, and I am living in Indianapolis, Indiana, about 30 minutes away from Davey, so not too close.
Yeah.
And I work full-time as a social media marketer / creative producer for an agency here in Indianapolis. I've been there almost 6 years, so it's been a while. And I am also in grad school at Wheaton College with Aubrey Sampson.
That's right.
I know her.
So fun.
And we are studying a master's in evangelism and leadership with the Propel cohort at Wheaton. And we graduate, we officially walk in May of 2022. So
We're almost done.
Final exam coming up, and we are ready to wrap this up.
This is beyond senioritis, right?
Yeah.
This is like
And
whatever
then
you call that.
I'm also the podcast producer for
That's
Nothing is Wasted Ministries.
Never
right.
heard of it. What's that?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
And I've been doing that for a couple years now.
Yeah. You brought so much fresh creative energy to the Nothing is Wasted podcast, and most notably, there's so many things that you've done to really just breathe life into this ministry as a whole. But most notably, what our listeners will be familiar with is you were the first one to say, hey, we should do series. And one of the things that one of the series that you brought forward was this series, Sexual Betrayal.
Yeah.
Which ended up becoming the, number one listened series of all of our series.
And it's still the most listened to, right? Yeah. It's amazing.
Yep, which tells us it's a very prevalent topic that people are dealing with, but the church isn't often talking about it. So people want to hear, they want some solidarity and knowing like other people are dealing with this. there's a reason though that this was something that was really, really close to your heart, was helping people on this topic. Has to do with your story.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to just kind of jump back in time and begin to story with us what went on in your life that made this something that was so near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, for sure. And that producing that series in particular was such a healing part for me as well, that I was able to put that out there, and that a couple of the guests on there were people that helped me in my own journey, specifically That's Michael and Kristen Carey. So big shout out to them, and they will be a part of the story that you hear as well. Yeah. But I really feel like, even before I kind of get into the story, that I wanted to come and share this on the podcast. When I was praying about it this week, I felt like God was really telling me, every time I share my story, and I've done it in different places, it feels like a new chain is being broken off in some way, a new thing. And I felt like that today, that this time is breaking, kind of putting a final nail in the coffin of the generational curse of addiction in my family. I really feel like publicly sharing this is going to, I'm praying, will be breaking chains and putting that final nail in the coffin. Addiction runs in my family on all sides, many varying addictions, from sex addiction to gambling to substance abuse. The list goes on. And so I really pray today that that's a part of what this podcast accomplishes, is breaking some generational curses.
That's great. Wow.
Just kind of wanted to start with
that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
But I would say it kind of starts, like a lot of people's stories start in childhood. And my parents, I've always been really close with both my parents because I am the youngest of 4 children, but my 3 oldest siblings were from my mom's first marriage. And so I am my dad's only sibling, if that makes sense. That's usually like hard for people to understand. But my parents are currently married, and I'm my dad's only child. And then I'm also the youngest of 4. So I have youngest child privileges as well. Only child, youngest child.
And youngest, wow.
It's quite the combination for therapy. And so I was incredibly close with both of my parents. And I would say with my dad specifically, I felt close with him in a different way because my dad is me. Like we are so much of the same person that I always just felt a unique draw to him because we had the same sense of humor and the same way we approach situations, and even the same anger patterns and the same. So I could see myself in him in the good and the bad ways growing up, and that was always really apparent to me. But I would say that I wasn't delusional about the fact that my childhood years were not perfect. I was aware of that. There was a lot of anger in my house, a lot of walking on eggshells. Like, my dad is a really charismatic guy, and so some days he would be fun dad, or some moments he would be fun dad, and then I would knock a glass of milk off the counter and it wasn't so fun anymore. Or, my mom would say something that my dad didn't like, and he would take his anger out on her. And it was never physical abuse, but it was a lot of emotional and verbal abuse. And a lot of times I played the protector for my mom in those situations because I was so much like my dad. I would go toe to toe with him, even as a child. And so that was always, I took on, finding out later, I took on different roles in my family, like a parental role at some points, and even a spousal role for both of my parents, just by doing things like that. And so
kind of a mediator in some ways.
Yeah. And because I was so close with them, it would just, I felt like I would get in between their marriage at some points.
Wow.
And in some ways I grew up too fast.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I would say that my dad, though, was always present. He was always a present dad. He coached all my sports. Wow. He was constantly there. Like, there was never a question that like my dad didn't love me. Like, I always knew he loved me, and he was always present. But there was a lot of harder times in my growing up years. What I thought when I was younger is that those times, like, his anger was because of financial reasons. I thought that our family didn't have enough money, and that was true. And I thought that that's why he was upset. And I didn't find out until later that there was a lot more happening under the surface, including a sex addiction and sexual betrayal.
Wow.
And so when I was about 16, what we call in the sexual betrayal circles is Discovery Day. I was on our family's home computer when that was still a thing. And I don't know why, I was surfing through history or something, and a dating website came up. And basically, my dad had been, well, I assumed it was my dad, had been on a dating website. And
because at this point, your siblings were out of the house, right? They're so much older.
Correct. Yeah. So my siblings are way older than me. Yeah. So I grew up from the age of 6 on by myself.
Right.
Yeah. So, so yeah, that was kind of weird and confusing. And so I immediately went to my mom about it and just was like, I don't know why this is on the computer. Yeah. I don't know whose this would be. Like, why would dad be on a dating website? Right. And I had no indication prior to this that like there was anything beyond like, you know, my parents being married and that relationship being solid in that way, at least. And so I immediately, because of who I am, and I am an 8 on the Enneagram. I immediately,
the challenger for listeners who don't know. Yeah.
I went into anger mode. And so I immediately said to my mom, like, you lock the door, change the locks, throw his stuff out on the front lawn. Like, you know, I took it to the extreme immediately and just was like, you need to talk to him about this. Like telling my mom as a 16-year-old, like how she needed to handle her marriage, essentially. Wow. And, you know, a couple weeks later, the situation just didn't matter anymore to them, or at least to my mom. When she took it to my dad, he kind of explained it away, and I was left still furious and no resolution, and there was just something else like swept under the rug in my family. But this time it was bigger than all the other times before in my mind. And so that was confusing to me because I assumed from watching all the movies that if there was any sort of cheating or hint of cheating that was calls for divorce.
Right.
But that is not what happened. And so from 16 to 18, my anger grew to the point where I just essentially didn't talk to my dad for 2 years.
Wow, Taylor.
And so that was my way of self-protecting. I, you know, went to friends' houses. I did my own thing. Stayed out of the house as much as possible. I was actually looking at prom photos recently and realized my dad wasn't at any of those things.
Wow.
Like at that point. And that was really like, it was painful for me to ice him out because I loved him so much. But I didn't know what else to do with my pain at the time. And so fast forward, I go to college, and I was really worried about going to college, mainly because I knew my dad still had anger issues, and I didn't want to leave my mom alone with him when I felt like I was her protector.
Wow, Taylor.
But I didn't know that, you know, I kind of just ignored the rest of the stuff. I'm like, well, if they're going to ignore it, I'm going to ignore it. I don't know what's happening. You know, maybe that was a weird fluke. But my dad had those 2 years that I iced him out, they were really hard in our house. And there was some conversations he had with me about divorce. And so I just was really confused by the entire thing and just wanted to leave. And that's what I did. So I kind of spent about 3.5 years ignoring the situation at college.
Wow.
And when I came home, my dad had gotten help, I guess, and maybe gotten some anger management help. I think he might have gone to a little bit of counseling. And, you know, there was a lot of things from my mom saying like, oh, he's just so much different now. He's better. And I was like, I don't really think he is. Like he still has, you know, crazy anger outbursts. Maybe just not as frequently, but they're still horrific. So, yeah, I kind of just, the grace of God told me that I needed to find a counselor myself. I just felt when I was coming out of college that I didn't even know why, because I didn't know the deeper underlying issues in my family, but I was like, I just need to get some help. Like I need to start talking to somebody and start piecing out like I was just even thinking like the basic childhood wounds I had already
Right.
had.
Yeah,
right.
exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
And
Were you seeing that come out sideways at all? Is that what maybe tipped you off to, wow, maybe I should get some help with this? Like
Yeah, that's
in your
what I
own
was
spirit,
wondering.
you know, because like I mean, you expressed that there was a lot of anger there,
Mm-hmm.
and in a second, I'm gonna challenge you a little bit to go deeper and share with us some of the underlying
yeah.
emotions that were there that maybe you didn't have language for then, but you have language for now, right? But what was happening at that point that made you go, I need to go get a counselor. I need to get help with this. You know, how was that surfacing?
Honestly, it was the Holy Spirit. And that's something that I firmly believe in all of my healing, that Holy Spirit has led me step by step.
Yeah.
And that's the graciousness that he has, is that I knew the next right thing to do because he was telling me the next right thing to do, not because I had a roadmap, not because anybody else in my family had gotten help before,
Right.
not because, I mean, I'd never heard the word counselor in my house, really. And so I felt in college, I remember specifically being at this retreat for my church and having like some kind of quiet time or whatever. And I was journaling and I was like, I need a counselor. Like, I don't know why, but I need a counselor, and it has to do with my dad. That's literally all I knew.
Wow.
And so give me a context. How many years ago was this that you were at this retreat in college?
Well, probably about 8 years ago.
Okay. So still like counseling was relatively, you know, I would reach back to about 8 to 10 years ago. It still was not this like hugely common thing.
Yeah.
You know, right now
It still had a stigma around it for
exactly.
sure.
Yeah.
It was kind of talked about at the church I was at Purdue a little bit, but it was not, I would say, like encouraged or like pushed or whatever. I just was like, I need somebody to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Essentially. So basically, I kind of put that off initially, but I got involved in a church here in Indy, and God started just getting a hold of me, and I could just tell that he was preparing me for something. And, you know, I was discipled a little bit at that church, and Holy Spirit just started showing up and telling me things kind of as we went. And in 2016, I started getting text message and emails, on an almost daily basis from somebody who claimed to be my dad's mistress.
Oh,
gosh.
Taylor.
Oh my gosh.
And so that was pretty weird.
Out of the blue.
Yeah.
Right. And you didn't know this person, right?
No.
Oh, man.
So
And
I was getting.
you were a college student still, or you were out?
This was after college.
Okay,
yeah.
so you're early 20s, and this is happening. Unbelievable.
So a couple years out of college, about 2 years out of college, and I'm starting to get, all these text messages and emails from somebody claiming to be my dad's mistress. And she was saying things about how my family was fake. My dad, you know, who he presented himself wasn't the truth. And who my mom wasn't the truth. And just saying things to me that I didn't even know about my own family. Wow. And that went on off and on for almost a year.
Wow, Taylor.
And I found out she was also contacting my mom and my parents, and I just was furious. And so at that point, I was going to my parents and I was saying, what's happening? What's going on?
Yeah.
Who is this woman? Why am I getting these messages? And I was kind of pushed to the side again. And it was like, I felt like I was constantly involved in my parents' marriage, but also not involved enough.
Not
like
invited.
I knew enough
Right.
to be upset,
Right.
but not enough I wasn't involved enough to like really change anything about the situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Phew, man. I mean, I can only imagine the feelings of, you know, your entire sense of what was reality just being dismantled. You know, what you thought like your family structure was, what you thought your childhood was. I mean, what kinds of other thoughts began to creep into your head and your heart during this time? You know, I mean, what was that general feeling of? I know confusion, obviously, but
Yeah.
what else did you begin to feel in those moments?
Well, initially during this time, I kind of just was like, I didn't know what that meant. Like, I didn't know, like, was this woman lying? Was this woman, you know, my dad's actual mistress? Was it somebody he met one time and she was trying to blackmail him?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like we were getting fed a little bit of lies about the situation. And so I wasn't quite sure what to believe. And the only way I knew how to cope with pain at the time was to ignore it.
So you were kind of like, I either need to get to the bottom of this, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to make any kind of judgment or whatever. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, or I'm just going to avoid it.
Or I'm going to avoid it, which at the time is literally the only thing I knew how to do.
Yeah.
So that was my initial reaction. And it was a lot of, I mean, there was pain and turmoil and all of that, but I didn't know what else to do. Like I wasn't getting answers, and I just felt like I didn't know how else to like cope or live if like nobody was going to tell me what was happening.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so fast forward to 2017.
Okay,
so about a year later.
Okay.
And at that point, in my life, I felt this need to do something more for God and to learn about Him in a new way. So that's when I enrolled in grad school.
Okay.
And I had been serving in my church and being discipled and leading all these small groups and doing all these things that were awesome. But I felt like God was calling me to like another level.
Mm-hmm.
And so that summer I went to my first class. So when I met Aubrey.
Good times.
And we spent I think it was like about a week, right? At that first class. And I could tell something was going on at home during that class. Like I was getting some calls from my mom. We had a few like weird come to Jesus moments about my dad when she was crying about things. But I just didn't really know what was going on because like I said, there'd always been enough turmoil in my life. I didn't like think anything different of this time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the day I get home from my first grad school class, my mom sat me down and she said, "Your dad has been sexually betraying me for the entirety of our marriage, and we're getting a divorce."
Oh, goodness.
Taylor.
Wow.
And so I didn't know what to do. But in that moment, to answer your previous question, I immediately thought my entire childhood was a lie.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And that was my first reaction, was that like nothing, all of those times, all of the times my dad coached my basketball team, or we did something fun, or we had a nice family time.
Yeah.
Like I was like, what else was he doing?
Yeah.
And so, it all kind of became a lie in an instant.
Wow, Taylor.
Gosh.
So
Yeah,
I have to
go
give a
ahead.
little bit of context here too, because our first class together was a class on kingdom and shalom. And so we are spending with a very charismatic, powerful professor. So here we are for a week really learning about wholeness and victory and God's power. And that class itself felt like spiritual renewal. And so Taylor, the fact that you left that to go into what you went into, I just can't imagine how difficult that was.
It was a weird juxtaposition for sure, but it also, again, it felt like the grace of God. Like I don't know why. Like, why would He have timed it like that?
Yeah.
Other than to like set, like, I think the theme of my life and my pain specifically has been this juxtaposition, this weaving together of pain and purpose, of like putting me in places, teaching me things about God and about His kingdom that I didn't know before, while simultaneously going through some of the most traumatic events in my life.
Wow, Taylor.
That's such an interesting thing that you're noting. I feel like it kind of occurred to me that this happens so often where the timing seems to be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
To where you could almost attribute it to one of two things, which I think is actually probably you could attribute it to both things simultaneously. But one of those things being, this is a spiritual attack. The enemy is trying to thwart this new thing that is happening in my spirit right now, in my soul, as I'm learning about kingdom and shalom, as I'm starting to step into this new, like, fresh, restorative rhythm of life, right? Now the enemy is going to kind of bring this up to try to squelch all of that, right? And yet at the same time, you just sat here and described it as the grace of God.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Your perspective was, oh no, actually, that this was like an invitation.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I just think that like without that, like if I did not have grad school that time and it grad school kind of helped me a bunch of times after that during the healing process. Like I would have felt hopeless.
Yeah,
Like
right.
I would have
Yeah.
felt like not only is my personal life and my family life like in shambles, but I don't have anything to hold on to either.
Yeah, right.
Like outside of that, I have nothing bigger than myself. Like that's honestly how I would have felt in that,
Right.
like in that moment if I didn't have that.
Wow.
So you see it as, God in his foreknowledge is knowing this is going to get exposed and revealed, right? And so he providentially weaves you into this space where
Amazing.
you're prepared for that. You're anchored a little bit more, so that you're not just tossed to and fro by the waves of this crisis. And I think at the same time I see it as, we all get confronted by our trauma, whether it's something that we have no control over or not, right? And it can cause us to want to like avoid or escape. Or if we see it properly, right? If we see it as like what you're saying, the grace of God, as an invitation or as a preemptive, preparation season, then it causes us to kind of dive deeper into healing that maybe we didn't even realize that we needed. You know?
Yeah. God was pursuing me. Like
Right.
he had been for years. And I can track it back really into like when I was like 6, like,
Yeah.
and there was a prophecy spoken over me as a little girl, like about my future and about God's hand in my life and how I would be a part of healing others.
Wow.
And so I can see, and I can name thousands of other countless times that God showed up and told me those things, but I was running from it for a long time and I didn't know how to step into it. Like
Yeah.
because I had no prototype to follow. Like I had never seen it before in my life or in my family. And granted, my mom, we probably have to eventually explain like who my mom is in this scenario.
Right?
She's amazing.
So my mom is my best friend, and she is an incredible woman of God who is a spiritual
She
powerhouse
is.
and has an anointing on her life. And without her, I wouldn't know where I would be spiritually. I mean, she's mentored me and discipled me and built me into the woman I am today as far as my relationship with God goes. And so to have her as an anchor in all of this has always been incredible. But the journey that I'm on in my life and what God has been doing for me was not hers. And so it's still a new path that I feel like God's been forging in me that I couldn't follow my mom. Like my mom took me to a certain point,
Right.
Yeah.
and then I had to divert. Like I had to like diverge off.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm curious, maybe there's nothing here, but I wonder, as you kind of observe how your mom walked in, in retrospect, how your mom walked in all of this, to what extent that became very pivotal in you being as grounded in the Lord as you are right now, right? Like you could have gone off the rails when you discovered all this stuff, but like how instrumental was she in helping to tether you to the Lord as well, even in times of, her helping in your development, your mentoring, your all that kind of stuff early on. Kind of that concept of like her ceiling becomes your floor in some ways. Can you identify anything like that? I mean, any thoughts come to mind?
Well, the funny part is the day that my mom sat me down and told me that they were getting a divorce and about my dad's addiction and sexual betrayal, I was mad at her
Sure.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had been mad at my mom since I was 16 when
Right.
when the
you
first
first
time I
discovered it.
found
Yeah.
out she didn't do anything about it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so even though I deeply love my mom and she has been a mentor in my life and she knows this, we've had these conversations, I had to go through some deep healing with her is just as much as my dad, if not more in some ways, because I blamed her for enabling the situation
right.
and for sticking around. But my mom taught me some beautiful things from it too that I didn't have the maturity to see yet. And that was her resiliency and her willingness to listen to Holy Spirit and to stay in a marriage
Yeah.
of betrayal for the good of my dad
Right.
Wow.
and not herself.
As you're saying this, I think for some reason what pops into my mind is Naomi, Because in the story of Ruth and Naomi, right? Naomi experiences all this heartache, and she ends up coming back, changing her name. Naomi means sweet. She changes it to bitter. And she kind of becomes like kind of neutralized in the story then, right? It seems like she just kind of this neutral fixture. There's not this like, she's not Orpah. She wasn't Ruth either though.
Right.
She wasn't able to produce anything out of it. And yet what she did was she helped to position Ruth to experience the redemption that Ruth experienced.
Yeah.
She was the one encouraging Ruth. She was the one that, and her, just by her like kind of walking in the spirit that she walked in, Ruth was able to experience this incredible story. And there, of course, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but that's just what came to my mind as we're talking about your mom and you and this kind of interesting journey that you guys have been on together.
Yeah, and it is similar in a way as well, because I was so angry at her because I wanted more for her.
Right.
Just kind of like Ruth wanted more for Naomi.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wanted more for her, but not just even in her marriage and ministry, because in some ways I felt like my dad had held her back from everything that she could have been doing as well in ministry. Now, granted, my mom still was resilient and she did her thing and she was always ministering to so many women and doing church things and
she's a prayer warrior.
And she's a prayer warrior. I mean,
the foundations that she shook with her prayers, or that she does shake with her prayers, it's like, I don't think there's any comparison in the natural world. You know?
Yeah.
But,
So there was so much. I mean, I can't now say that like she missed out on things, but I felt like that at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's your feeling of
that I was like she could do so much more.
Yeah.
Like I know that it just so so yeah.
Yeah, so what kind of what you're saying is in the season you were feeling this like resentment or frustration, like anger toward her. Now you can kind of look back on it and appreciate some of the same things that you were feeling really frustrated with her about.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the only way I got there is because of the healing journey that I
right
began to go on after that day.
Right. Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, the first thing I did was change churches.
Okay.
And I started going to Resonate Church.
Yeah.
And I felt the need to do that because I had felt that I had hit a ceiling at the church I was previously, and that I needed to start over in a place that I could be discipled by somebody that had gone through pain and talked about it openly. And that was you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I love how both you and Aubrey weave in and out of my story.
That's why this is really special.
So cool.
Yeah. So I found a lot of healing sitting under your teaching for a couple months initially, and just kind of and not serving.
Yeah.
Because I had been really involved in my previous church. So just being fed. And I then found, my mom had been going to this group called Women in the Battle that is hosted by Kristen Carey.
All right, hold on, because I know we're going to end up going.
Yeah.
Can you, that really struck me for a second. You needed a season for a few months where you weren't serving and you were just getting fed.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, I don't know how many pastors are listening to this, but I think I've been guilty of being like, well, people aren't, they're not walking in the fullness.
They're not really church.
If they're not
totally
serving, they're not, and we have this like black and white but one of the things I learned in that same season you're talking about is there are a lot of people that were coming to Resonate, same story as you. They were just looking for a place to heal for a little bit.
Yeah. At the time, I thought that serving was my only ministry. And so I found a lot of identity in it. And I felt like I was so broken and confused that I was like, I don't even know what would come out of my mouth if I led another small group right now, or if I led another team of volunteers. Like I just felt like almost that I would be volatile to others. And so I needed to step away. And honestly, I should have stepped away longer than I did. I still felt so pressured by my own need to do, and my own need to like feeling like I still feel this now sometimes because I'm not serving in a church right now, that I was not like a full functioning member of the body of Christ because I wasn't serving at the time when really I needed to be served at the time. And so I took a couple months off, and then I immediately jumped into high school ministry.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, as I look back on the culture of our church that we had set, we were in that culture where it was like we consistently pressed people like, hey, you need to get involved, you need to serve. And I mean, it's not a bad thing in and of itself. However, I don't remember us ever, and me personally, ever saying things like, hey, if you just need a space to like heal and take a breath, this is a safe space for you. And then you can take a step whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
Right? Like I don't remember ever pulling the pressure off of that gas pedal at all.
Yeah.
And so it's just it's interesting to me now in the seat that I sit as I go around to other churches and I experience different cultures, and also experience that the church struggles to make a place and create a space where it's safe to just start unpacking your pain.
Yeah, that's so true.
We start busying ourselves again.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay.
I mean, but again, I go back to follow Holy Spirit. Like some people, they need serving in the way of like, they need to outwork their pain
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
It's an expression that exactly.
And so
it's similar to, I don't want to reduce it, but it's similar to like, if you're feeling stressed and you need to go for a run and work out, you need to expend that energy in a
or you need to
productive
distract
way.
yourself in a way that's healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it really is person by person. And I don't think that there's like a prescription. I just knew at the time for me that I was like, I can't be the leader that I need to be in a spiritual sense in my current state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I almost was doing it more for the protection of others than anything.
It's very mature of you, Taylor.
And like I said, I should have waited longer, but it's fine. It is what it is now. So
okay, so then you go to Women in the Battle.
yeah. So my mom started going to Women in the Battle. I don't. She might have been there like almost a year prior to this.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I did find out later that my parents had been working on things prior to me finding out about them, but they were being pretty secret about it.
Okay.
Because I think they didn't know what was going to happen. And she said, hey, they want to start a daughters group for Women in the Battle, Daughters of Sexual Betrayal. Do you want to go? And I was like, who's going to be there? And she's like, I don't know. Like, I think they range in age from like 16 to like 20 something. And I'm like, I think at the time, I'm like, what's 2017? I can't do math that fast. I'm 29 now. I don't know. I was like 25.
You're 25-ish.
Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm going to be in a group with some 16-year-olds. Okay, great. Like, but I went because I really didn't feel like I had another option. I didn't know where else to go. And that began a healing journey where I was in the daughters group and helped lead the daughters group and daughters retreats for from December of 2017 until this summer.
Wow.
And that was a big part of my healing journey was being in that community and being, normalizing the fact that, and this is something I'd like to say to listeners too, people talk a lot about sexual betrayal as it pertains to partners, but not as it pertains to children of sexual betrayal.
Right.
And a lot of people have sexual betrayal in their stories and they don't, because of their parents. And it's maybe they like walked in on a parent or they found something on a computer when they were young and it's something they've shoved under the rug and have never addressed. Like that has created trauma in your life. And it is something that, I would highly recommend that you address, that you bring up to a counselor, that you pay attention to, because it's not normalized in our culture that I would be hurt because of my parents' choices in that way.
Wow.
Jeez.
Wow.
And for many kids, it's not. And that's stuff that I learned because of the daughters group. And because I was listening to 16-year-olds tell me that, about their stories and the way their families were operating and how that wasn't being validated.
Yeah. What I love about that daughters group is, I don't know why your story keeps bringing up some of these systemic things within my thought process right now, but I feel like systemically what I see a lot of times is we have conversations with people who are going and they're tracing back early childhood trauma.
Right.
But it's not in real time. It's like way back in the past, and it's like it's now coming out, and I've got to address this, and I've got to figure this out. What I love about this daughters group is, it is as best as it can. It is trying to help track with them in real time.
Yeah.
Going, hey, you've just discovered this.
Yeah.
Now even as young as you are, and as difficult it is to start putting emotion or words to your emotions, let's unpack this. Let's talk about this a little bit. Almost so that like when you're 45, it's not just like surfacing all of a sudden because you suppressed it at age 16 or you suppressed it at, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's incredible that's available. And the travesty is I think there's not a whole lot of those kind of resources available to kids and teenagers right now.
For sure. And that is, that was a part of it, is it feels like, again, the grace of God, that even though I was like, I could have dealt with this at 16, like me personally, like I could have gotten help then, like these girls are able to get, I still felt like, I was like, I feel young in my healing journey. There was a lot of women, there has been women that I've met that are in their 40s and 50s, and they've never addressed the fact that, their dad was a sex addict or that their mom left them and cheated on them regularly or whatever. And so I feel blessed that I even dealt with it in my 20s. But yeah, I wish that I had a group at 16 that I could have gone to.
Do you recognize, as you look back on this group specifically, what were some of those pivotal moments of just like breakthrough pertaining to this group?
Yeah. There was definitely a couple. I would say, so initially I had to set up a lot of boundaries. That was kind of step one in my healing journey. And that group kind of helped me do that. I had to set up boundaries with my dad, with communication with him. Initially, I set up a lot of boundaries, and then we've kind of slowly taken them down over the years. So initially it was like, I don't want to see you and I don't want to talk to you. I need some time and space.
Yeah.
And then it was, I will only see you if my mom's around. I don't want to see you by myself. I asked him not to hug me anymore or to touch me. I asked him to stop saying I love you because it felt too hard to hear. I asked my mom to stop referring to my dad as daddy because that felt weird and too much like my childhood. That felt now like a lie. There was a lot of just little minutia things that as I went along and I talked to women in that group and got permission to set up boundaries about these kinds of things, that I didn't feel crazy, that those things bothered me, that I was able to set up a lot of those boundaries. And in all of this, I also was in counseling and outside of the daughters group. I haven't really talked about that a lot, but between counseling and the daughters group, I was learning these things, like learning the importance of boundaries and setting those up with my mom too. And, I had to learn how to stop being a surrogate spouse to both of my parents and to get out of their marriage.
Yeah.
And that involves boundaries. So like if I was around the two of them and they would start fighting, like I would just leave the room instead of trying to mediate it. And so, so I set up a lot of boundaries initially, and those.
Was that a relief for you, or was that difficult?
Both.
Yeah. How so?
Both, because again, I loved my dad dearly. Like I've always loved my dad. And so it's so painful. And I talk to girls about it all the time. It is so painful to set up boundaries with people that you love.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to. I didn't want to. I felt like I was the parent. Like I didn't want to do that. And my dad pushed all those boundaries, and both of my parents in ways made me feel bad about setting those boundaries. Made me feel guilty about it. Like I didn't want to spend time with them, or that I didn't love them because I wouldn't say I love you, or that I didn't want to hug him. And that was the opposite of it. Like I loved him so much, I had to set up those boundaries.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes we can kind of think that those are mutually exclusive concepts. boundaries in love, that
Yeah.
we're setting up boundaries to draw a line in our love, and it's like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
Those aren't mutually exclusive. They can coexist.
Yeah.
Taylor, and Davey sort of alluded to this earlier, so I think this is where he was going, but as you talk through your story, and I'm just thinking of like 6-year-old Taylor and 16-year-old Taylor and 26-year-old Taylor, it's a lot of years to process this pain. And I know you said that your initial reaction was anger, and then you've jumped into what you did. I mean, this is my very 4 on the Enneagram. I would really like to know what you felt. Like, what was obviously a sense of betrayal, but and obviously anger, but were you heartbroken? Were you ashamed of your dad? Were you like, what were the real, like, little girl wounds that Taylor Carlier carried that the Lord has ministered to now?
Yeah.
It's hard for me to talk about my feelings.
I know.
Aubrey.
I know. I know it is, Taylor.
Because I for a long time I couldn't really identify my feelings. So it's all retroactive identification now. But I would say, yeah, some of those underlying feelings was like I was deeply sad that like I lost this relationship with my dad. Like that was the a part of the shrapnel of like the explosion that he caused. Like I didn't want to lose that relationship. Like he did that to me. He did that to my mom. He did that to our family. Like, and so I was deeply sad about that. And I didn't know what that meant for their future. Like at the time I thought they were getting a divorce. So like, I was going into survival mode and immediately was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to take care of my mom. I'm going to have to she's going to have to move in with me. Like I'm going to have to, I didn't know what I was going to have to do, but that, so I would say, I guess the feeling is betrayal, like you said, but I would say that the thing that it hurt the most was my trust. And that's the thing that's been the hardest to repair to this day is my trust and probably my vulnerability, and which kind of for me goes hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm going to go address it because I don't want this being distracting. You guys, you're hearing it pretty bad too. I tried texting Christy to see if, hold on.
Okay.
I was like a little worried. Is everything okay, little guy?
You sound sad.
You're doing a great job,
We're
Taylor.
already at 45 minutes. Oh my God.
I know. You're doing so good though. It's so...
I hope so. I feel like I have like 9,000 more things to say, and I like.
Well, because we do need to probably turn now to like more of the healing journey.
I need to talk more about the healing now.
And then I was thinking, I don't know if this is too personal, but do you want to talk about the painting that you had commissioned? Because I feel like that's such a beautiful.
Oh, I forgot about that.
It's such a beautiful beauty from ashes, and I know that we don't always want to like wrap things up in a pretty bow, and it's not over because of that. But that's such a beautiful metaphor. Why don't I add more things for you to say? That may be too personal.
Can you remind me about it though?
Yep.
I don't mind talking about it.
Yeah, I'll ask you about
I feel like though I have said some things that I'm like I cannot say that.
Then we'll edit it all. Like you'll listen and we'll edit all that stuff out. I know there were some things I thought, I bet Taylor won't want this out, but we'll change all that. Right now it's just us in the room.
I'm like, oh God, I cannot say that. I don't know what I was thinking. that was like those were my inner thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I just feel more disarmed here than I have telling it other places. And so I'm like feeling like
free kind of to like
free, but also like not as put together about it.
Yeah.
I'm usually way better at telling this story like in a succinct manner.
We're probably not helping by like, what about this? What about that?
Davey does interrupt a lot.
Yeah, he does. I noticed.
I could have wrapped this up
like
at least
Davey,
10
let her
minutes
talk.
ago.
No, he has good insights.
Oh, yeah.
Is he okay?
Sorry,
How is Coco?
Poor little baby.
Pets' heads are falling.
Oh God.
What's going on?
Dogs and kids.
Oh.
We have demons in our house, I think. And I'm not talking about Cohen. Everything is breaking.
Oh my God.
Oh, so
Everything.
stressful. Oh.
So it's like we'll schedule an appointment with a repair person or something, right? And then it's like we get that fixed, and then boom, something else breaks. And last
that's
night,
the worst.
we had our garbage disposal like sprung a huge leak.
Oh no.
So right now the kitchen sink was like dishes and we made this huge like dinner last night with Previn and Amanda, so it was like dishes everywhere, but we couldn't, and as I start doing it, it's like leaking all over, leaking into the downstairs. So I call the plumbers up. I'm like, we got to get this addressed today because we can't do a thing in our kitchen right now. So then while they're out here, they're checking out a spigot that outside keeps blowing an O-ring. And he's like, we're going to have to go in and cut the ceiling and like, and these guys are great. You know, sometimes you always question, I've used these guys first, like for our rental property, for everything. We trust them so much. And he's like, I'm so sorry, man. This is like the worst news ever. Like seriously, there's demons in our house right now. It's crazy.
So sorry.
All right. Anyways.
Okay. We need to I need to talk more about healing stuff so I can wrap it up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So let me tell one more story about one more like pivotal healing story, and then I can kind of work to close it down.
Yeah. Sounds good. Cool. Do we want to just start in? What do you think from an editing standpoint?
I think if one of you can ask something, because she just finished wrapping up answering Aubrey's question. So if one of you wants to ask a question to lead into.
Can you just
Aubrey,
ask me something about more instances in my healing journey, or like more pivotal moments or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So it kind of ended. We were on like the emotion stuff. Trust.
Talking about
That's
trust,
what you said.
yeah.
Trust. Okay. Okay. Taylor, I would love to hear. Thank you, by the way, for your vulnerability and sharing this with us and with our listeners. Really appreciate that, because I know vulnerability is not necessarily your go-to. So
my least favorite.
Taylor loves other people to be vulnerable.
I do.
She does. That's true. She values.
She's
that.
always encouraging that.
It's because I want to learn from their vulnerability.
Yeah,
that's good.
Let's hear some more pivotal healing moments. Like, let's talk about now what the Lord began to do in you and through you.
Mm-hmm. I would say one of the other there were so many. It's hard to even explain them all, but one of the really major ones for me actually happened in the summer of 2019. So that means I was about 2 years into the healing process at this time. And I was helping Kristen lead a daughter's retreat. And we did them in the summer. I think we had probably about 8 girls there. And we had this time that Kristen had planned an exercise to basically just go off on your own and spend time with God and ask him what he wants to tell you kind of thing. And I had prepared, I don't know why I did this. Maybe my counselor told me to do this, or God, or I don't know who told me to do this. I had brought with me to this retreat photos of my dad when he was younger.
Wow.
And so I brought a photo of him. The youngest I could get, because we didn't have any of his baby photos, was when he first became a dad, when he was when I was a baby. Yeah. And I just brought a couple of photos of that and of me growing up with him. And I just prayed over them at this retreat. And God, again, Holy Spirit took me on a journey that I couldn't have orchestrated myself, and helped me broke my anger that day towards my dad,
Taylor.
through empathy.
Wow.
And so basically he taught me, I started praying over them, and I wrote a letter to my dad's younger self.
Wow.
And I just wrote a letter to him and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that you were hurt in your childhood like you were. I'm so sorry that you married into this family as an essential baby yourself. Yeah. And I'm so sorry for the hurt that you took on, and that you went through all those years the way you did with the trauma you were carrying. Wow. And that's how you experience this life. I just walked in his shoes for I was just bawling. I was just tears streaming down my face. I was I don't know how he even made it. I don't even know how he became half of the person that he came today if it wasn't for God, because of what my dad has gone through, let alone then the choices he's made because of those things. And it was a huge empathy moment for me to realize that, my dad's a human and that we're all, because of our pain, we're all one decision away from some really terrible choices.
Right.
And I know that God's even teaching me that more and more this year. And the prevalence of addiction in my family, like I mentioned, like I watch myself, I watch my addictive patterns and my addictive habits that I have. And I am no better than my dad. Like I'm no worse than my dad. I'm, like we are all sinful. We're all so close to going down a path of destruction to cope with our pain, like my dad did. Yeah. And so that was a huge moment for me. And that was the day I stopped being angry with my dad.
Wow. That's what's so amazing about that is, that these times, these moments that culminate from out of this, like what seems to be conflict or what seems to be this, obviously betrayal. And, it doesn't seem to be, it is, but it's you've just expressed how it can get flipped on its head and it can turn into and morph into compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that is almost that's what is I don't want to say required, but it's almost like compassion is the thing that needs to flow before forgiveness and healing really can.
It's a part of the antidote, really.
Yeah.
Like it's the antidote to anger and to pain and to, it's like gratitude. Like it changes something in me that can then change how I act.
Yeah. To softening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So
incredible, Taylor.
That was obviously a huge moment. And from that day on, like, there was more boundaries I was able to take down with my dad. And the entire time that I'm finding my own healing, my parents are also finding theirs, and they're going to their own counseling, their own groups. My dad's getting serious help. There was so many, I can't sugarcoat it. There was years even during this time that I didn't feel like he was a different person. I thought he was faking everything. So it was hard to, sometimes my mom would say he was doing amazing and I was like, I don't see it. And so it's hard to trust that. But I just had to focus on my own healing. And that's what I tell daughters all the time. Like, it doesn't matter what your parents are doing or not doing, or if your dad is getting help, or has gotten help. Like, you have to find your own healing for yourself.
Right.
Even though their pain has brought this upon you, like you have to get your help for your pain.
That's so good. That's so true.
And so God was working on him while he was also working on me. And fast forward, we just started to slowly, be able to hang out more. And I just like tiptoed, like, one little thing after a thing, like, okay, I can now be around my dad and just be just the two of us. And like, we can go meet up and like have dinner together or whatever. And we started to be able to do that and just break down those walls, one meeting by one meeting. And he was working his steps and he apologized for a lot of things. We had a lot of like serious conversations, and my parents reconciled, and they did a lot of work. My parents and I went to counseling together. Wow. We did like some family counseling, which is pretty crazy for a family that never really done counseling before. And a lot of parents won't go to counseling with you. So I count that as a blessing, especially as an adult. But that's how willing my dad was to like keep me in his life, because he knew, like, I gave him a couple of ultimatums along the way. Like, he knew that was, he had to find that healing to stay in my life. And I thank God that he loved me enough, and he loved my mom enough, and he loved God enough and himself enough to find that help. And he did. And now I don't know my dad.
Really?
In a good way.
Wow.
He's not the same person. He's me, but he's the better version of himself that he's ever been. Like, I don't know who he is. Like, we're so similar, but now he's like, he talks about God in ways that I've never heard him talk about God. And he like listens to me, and he he's present and he's not angry, and he's like the dad that I never knew I could have, but the same dad I always had.
Oh,
Wow.
Taylor. Wow. Unbelievable.
I was about to ask, like a father wound is, I mean, it's, we've talked about this before. It can be one of the, if not the deepest wound there is, right? And that's a strategy employed by the enemy to get us for it to really color the way that we look at our Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
How has this whole experience put a lens over how you look at the Heavenly Father, both in the good and the bad?
Mm-hmm. It's never been that much of a struggle for me.
Really?
Specifically viewing God as my father in that way. I've just always, I've always been able to separate the two, because I had no illusion that my dad was ever perfect.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
And so I've definitely been able to separate those two things. But I think that, seeing my dad being restored the way he has is actually what's hit me even more. It's that that the Father could do that for my father, cool. That he could restore in that way. And and I just got dinner with him like a week or two ago, and I just the two of us, and I looked at him, I said, do other people know who you are anymore?
Wow.
And he's like, only you and your mom and stuff. No, I'm like, yeah, but there's no way you're walking around this world the same. I can feel it. Yeah. And I'm the most scrutinizing out of all the people in your life. Wow. Even the days that my mom thought that he was doing well, I did not.
Yeah.
So the fact that I can now be my dad's not perfect, and he's going to make mistakes. I'm going to make mistakes. I don't want my dad to be perfect. I just want him to be whole and well and on the journey to wholeness and healing. And same for myself. That's all I want for me and for my mom and for my family as a whole. That's really what I want, and that's what I pray for. And so and Aubrey mentioned to me earlier that she wanted me to tell this little tidbit.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you would if you're comfortable sharing this it's a story I know with our listeners, because I think it's a beautiful picture of what God has done and is doing in your relationship with your parents.
Yeah. So my parents married, I guess this year was their 30th wedding anniversary. And I never really celebrated their anniversary before. I mean, just as a kid in general, you don't, right?
Right.
And then during those hard years, I definitely didn't want to celebrate it.
Right.
I wanted to ignore it and maybe just not have that happen again, them get a divorce instead. Yeah. And so holidays are always hard in any pain. But it's weird to not the anniversary of your parents' wedding.
Yeah. Right.
But this year on their 30th anniversary, I felt that I needed to symbolize and give them something more concrete to show their healing, and in some ways even our family's healing, because me and my parents have always been so close. And so my parents didn't have good wedding photos. They got married. It was my mom's second marriage, and it was just way more casual. And I think her friend's son took these photos on a disposable camera or something. They were they're pretty terrible. Most of them are poorly lit. You can't see anything in the photo.
Wow.
And so I found the best one that I could, but my parents don't have their wedding photos around the house because of that. We've never have.
Just because they're beautiful.
You can't display them.
Yeah.
And so I took one of those photos, the best one that I could find, and it was one of their hands with their unity candle that they still have next to their bed. And I had it commissioned for a painting commissioned. And in this photo is pink roses and their unity candle and their hands with their wedding rings on it. And my parents' hands are both just really recognizable, and all the way to the point where my dad's pinky was broken in football, and so it's bent. So it's and the guy that the woman that did this painting even got his bent pinky in it. and my mom's long nails, and it's all just really like, it's their hands.
Yeah.
And that unity candle representing their marriage that's always sat by their bed, and then those pink roses behind. What they didn't know at the time is that my dad would call me his pink rose, and so like it was like I was there in that photo, and I put the verse from the candle in there, and gave that to them for their 30th wedding anniversary, just as a symbol of how far that God has brought us and our family.
So powerful, Taylor.
So powerful. I mean, I love just even like of course, the imagery of the pink rose and you being present metaphorically in that picture, but also, I mean, your involvement in a lot of ways in their story, right? I mean, you have been intricately involved in their story in a lot of different ways. But I can see even your dad's like broken pinky, and I can see it juxtaposed with the, a wedding band, a wedding ring, which is supposed to be this like perfect, flawless, endless symbol here that is on a hand that is completely, tarnished and broken, and it like gives an image of who we are as and like what God does in what God can do in marriage, what God does with healing and restoration, with his interaction and intervention into our lives.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's redemption, right?
Yeah.
And they coexist. They're there together. It's not like this beautiful wedding ring makes this hand perfect and flawless. It's like, no, the broken pieces of our lives are being fastened together and held together in this unity of the Spirit,
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, there were so many things too that I feel like we could talk for hours.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so many things I feel like I haven't covered with it, but those were some of the core things for sure. And, but I would say that like God taught me so much during these healing years, like from 2017 till now. And like, he was so present with me, and he still has been so present with me, just constantly guiding me on this journey and like weaving my pain with my purpose. And I think one of the many things that he gave me was every year he would give me a verse for the year. It's kind of something that like I do at the beginning of the year. It's a verse and a word for the year. And even just looking back on my verses for the years during these healing years, I kind of wrote them down. And I can see the journey that God has been taking me on these past now almost 5 years. The first year he just told me to abide in him in 2017. And specifically the John 15, remain in me as I also remain in you.
Yeah.
And so he just was present with me that year that I found out about things. And then in 2018, he gave me shalom. So from that class, Aubrey, that we learned shalom, that's when I was first introduced to it. And he gave me the verse in John 14 about, I'm leaving you well and whole. That's my parting gift to you, peace. I don't leave you the way you're used to being left, feeling abandoned, bereft. So don't be upset. Don't be distraught. And then in 2019, the year of the empathy story, he gave me courageous obedience. And he told me to be strong and courageous, like in Joshua, and just keep going on this healing journey, essentially, that like he had something on the other side of this for me and for my family. And then last year, it was the gift of passion and gratitude. And I just really spent a year thanking God for like what he did for us. And then this year is creativity is the word. And I feel like now God's bringing me into a season where I'm being released. And I'm able to take this pain and with God, partnering with God, fashion it into something else.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's exactly what I was going to ask you, because I'm observing that as well. It's like you have several things in your life that seem like they're coming into transition. Grad school is finishing up, and it's like kind of this shift that I can sense in you, and I'm sure you can sense it in yourself, where now it's gonna be leveraged. All this stuff is gonna be leveraged for, for your next season of purpose. And I don't mean to be cliche with that, but it is. It's like, but I wonder if you have any insight into that, like a foresight into it, saying, this is what I want to do with this. Like, this is how I want to turn this around or partner with God in that?
I don't. I mean, I take everything step by step, moment by moment, like the next right thing. Like that's how God has always led me. And so, you know, I said yes to this podcast a couple of years ago. I said yes to leading those daughters groups. And then I felt this year that it was my time to stop doing those. And I said yes to grad school, and now that's finishing up this year. Like I've said yes to these different things along the way, like as God has opened those doors, and I just will continue to do that. And I don't know what that will look like going forward, but I know that God has always been there with me, and Holy Spirit's always led me to that next thing. And I feel I've always just felt like God has weaved my gifts with my ministry, and that's what I want to continue to do. And so I think that can take on so many different forms, with my background in communications and in my different careers and serving opportunities that I've said yes to over the years. But now I'm kind of at the edge of a new cliff, and I don't know fully what's next, but I do. I will just keep saying yes to what God has for me.
That's awesome.
It's awesome, Taylor.
Man, Taylor, this has been a very, very special time to be able to sit here and one, for me to hear your entire story, start to finish, and not just the pieces. And some of it, you know, I haven't heard the entire thing because I've journeyed with you in it, a lot of it, you know, and so I'm getting some of these real-time updates and a lot of
Aubrey, you didn't know everything, right? Or
no,
did you?
I didn't know everything. Okay. So it has been, I mean, it's been awesome to sit here and hear from you. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that is something that, you know, for all of us, it's very difficult to be vulnerable and to put those broken pieces of our life out on the table. But I really do truly believe that the more that you're doing that, the more you're going to step into that prophecy that was spoken over you at a young age.
Absolutely.
You're a healer. You're a healer. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
You speak words of life and you speak words of healing over people. And, you know, I just feel privileged to be able to have a front seat to it. And I'm excited to see what God does as you continue to step into your, you know, the fullness of who he's called you to be.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I'm excited too. Thank you so much, both of you, for being willing to do this with me and for inviting me to do it, Davey. And for the Nothing is Wasted audience for showing up and listening to this and listening to all of our episodes, because I'm just really grateful that this community, that all of you are part of my healing as well.